I mean, we have this saying in English, innocent until proven guilty. What about the guilty people? I mean, Onision's guilty. Don't get me wrong. He slept with the babysitter. He came out here and he promised everyone he was never going to sleep with her, and he insulted the audience and said that you people have a dirty imagination to imagine he was sleeping with this girl just because she was living with him as their live-in babysitter, and everyone was wrong and evil and bad except him. And then what do you know? She turned 18 and he slept with her. I don't think he's innocent. I think he's guilty of that exactly as described. But guess what? We all got to live in a society together, the innocent and the guilty alike. What is controversy? Controversy is unearned attention, right? So we have people quitting the House of Parliament, giving up their role in the democratic process because of controversy, because it hurts them, right? And you have people who are accelerating their careers and becoming prominent and influential politicians through controversy. So controversy starts to become a currency to be exploited. And maybe the darkest and most miserable interpretation of what Onision has done in the latest chapter is that he did this intentionally just for the controversy. But I mean, look, there's got to be justice and dignity and respect for all of us. And even a scumbag like Onision. Look, guys, human rights aren't just for people you personally like. They are, civil rights aren't just for people you sympathize with. How is Onision supposed to live? Look, as bad as his conduct has been, what he actually did, there are allegations and insults being made against it that are grossly exaggerated and wildly untrue and sometimes the figment of people's imagination. What about justice and dignity and civil rights for him? So we've reached the point where it's being asked, is Twitter too mean? Is Twitter too rough and tumble for elected representatives in democracy? We've also got to ask, is Twitter too mean? Is Twitter too rough and tumble for the weakest among us, for the strongest among us, for the most notorious among us, even for Onision himself? In this video, we're taking on the daring and difficult challenge of dealing with two topics in one video. A juxtaposition, if you will. There's a story in the mainstream press you may or may not have heard about British Parliament and about members of Parliament resigning because they couldn't endure the controversy. And the word controversy has here been reinterpreted as abuse. And meanwhile, in the demi-monde that is YouTube, Onision is a man who has made his career out of controversy, and he is now jokingly saying, we all know it's a joke, that he is going to quit YouTube forever because he can't endure the controversy and or the abuse. All right? So, there's a little bit of parallelism. Stick with me here. We get to pass judgment on Onision, and we get to have some slightly profound reflections on the practical philosophy of democracy in the 21st century. So the first thing I got to say about this news story that you may have heard, you may not even recognize it with this description. This story has been picked up and broadcast on different TV stations, radio shows, and newspapers with significant differences in the slant or the interpretation placed on it. But at its most extreme, the story has been broadcast with the claim that an improbably large number of female members of Parliament in England all simultaneously resigned their positions because they could not put up with the level of abuse being directed towards them on Twitter. Now, if you do just a little bit of reading, what you figure out is, no, it wasn't as if all these women have so much in common. Quite a few different members of Parliament resigned for different reasons. But this cohort of women all resigning at the same time, it did include some examples that came close to that headline-grabbing version of the story. So, for example, Heidi Allen. Heidi Allen is a former Conservative member of Parliament who has said now that she is not going to run for re-election at all because she cannot stand, quote, the nastiness and intimidation that has become commonplace. So some of the other MPs also who resigned for other reasons did include in their reflections that they really don't appreciate the level of abuse. Again, let's just pause and reflect here. Guys, in the last 20 years, the word harassment completely lost its meaning through overuse on the internet, right? I mean, it's even in YouTube policy. YouTube has a policy against harassment. What's the meaning of harassment? When you really look into it on a technical level, it's become impossible to define harassment. And now I feel like just in the last 5 years, the word abuse used to mean something tremendously serious. And now sort of step by step, the word is becoming more and more dilute in its meaning, to the point where mean comments on Twitter are considered and categorized as abuse. All right. So Heidi Allen, she was elected as a conservative member of parliament, and she is today a liberal Democrat. She switched parties. Now, even if you know nothing about British politics, you can imagine that would get you a lot of hate mail. In any country around the world, you may not use the term conservative and liberal Democrat. It doesn't take much imagination. If you were supported financially by the Conservative Party, that was the party you said you were going to represent, and those people supported you, and they voted for you, and they came to your rallies, and you said that was the ideology you were going to represent in Parliament, and then you're elected, and then you decide to switch political parties and switch to a political party that, at least on the level of adjectives, is the diametric opposite, a liberal Democrat party, you're going to get a lot of hate mail. People are really going to feel a sense of betrayal and hatred towards you. Now, the whole story of Heidi Allen is more complex and convoluted than that. In between being a member of those two parties, she quit the Conservative Party to stand as an independent, and then she teamed up with a number of independents and created a new political party that failed. And then that new political party rebranded itself. It's really quite an epic drama. But this is as much controversy as you could possibly have as a member of parliament in the British system. This is as the highest level of scrutiny and scorn you could possibly bring on yourself. If you like peace and quiet, maybe try dictatorship. Democracy as a system has many redeeming qualities. Social stability is not one of them. If you like people who are mousy and cowed and afraid to state their opinions about politics, try living in a tyranny. Try living in a dictatorship. Try living under an absolute monarchy. You'd be amazed. Many people who grow up in England or America, they don't know what it's like to live in a country where people are afraid to answer the question of what is your opinion, or what's going on in politics, where people really live with that level of fear. And democracy, we're right now in Athens, Greece. I mean, coming back to the Pnyx here in Athens, and even earlier, this ancient tradition in Greece. What you see again and again in the ancient texts that criticize democracy, because the ancient texts don't celebrate it uncritically. They really do talk about everything that's wrong with it. This element of democracy is complained about. Politicians were ruthlessly ridiculed and satirized in the comedies, in the theater in Athens, and they didn't really appreciate it. Socrates himself, ruthlessly satirized and criticized in the theater, in comedy, and ultimately it got him killed. Ultimately he was executed, in part because of the controversy that was stirred up and the scorn, the criticism that was placed on Socrates in the theater. And then eventually he went to court, and what do you know? The average man didn't sympathize with his case, didn't like his side of the story. So the rough and tumble of democracy, I'm not saying all things are forgivable or all things are excusable, but there are really some important questions to ask here about what did you expect? What did you think the job was when you were elected to be a member of parliament? I had an interesting moment reflecting on this. I had a friend who went to Italy because he had a girlfriend in Italy. He was a white Canadian. And in Italy, his girlfriend's brother was a major union activist, so labor union leader. When they met him, he had 2 armed security guards and wore a bulletproof vest. That was normal for him. As a labor union activist, labor union leader, he had armed guards and wore a bulletproof vest when he went out in public from place to place. This is Italy. I forget what year this was. This is 2001 or something. It's not that long ago, right? And this was normal. But this is politics. This is real politics. All right. I mean, I do think the question has to be asked: what was democracy? What is democracy? And what ought democracy to be? And I mean this sincerely. I think it applies to people like Onision as much as it applies to an elected member of parliament like Heidi Allen. You guys may not know this about me. I know what it's like to have really unreasonable rumors and allegations made about your sex life on the internet. And it's awful. And it's heartbreaking. And it discredits you and it makes you unemployable. And, then you're trying to do fundraising for a charity and nobody wants to have you there. Or, I go to a conference on vegan activism and I know the people who are whispering against me were there at that conference, and people are afraid to stand next to you, or people feel intimidated to look you in the eye, so on and so forth. Now, look, that's on them. I mean, you got a meeting of vegan activists, people who say they're going to change the world. Come on, homie. You got to have a little bit more backbone than this. If you got a problem with me, you should have the courage to say it to my face. If you've heard a rumor about me, you should have the courage to talk to me about it and resolve it. Lay it to rest one way or the other. Come on. You can't stand up to me. You can't talk to me, and you want to stand up to Tyson Chicken Corporation, Nestle Corporation. You want to stand up to, the cheese and dairy lobby. You want to change the world. Come on. This is ridiculous. The level of just cowardice and insincerity in the vegan movement is a much bigger problem than the rumors against me. But I know. So there was a young woman at the last vegan conference I attended, and I know exactly what she says about me behind my back, because other people tell me, sometimes with a laugh and sometimes with concern. But I know she goes around and tells people about me. He says really problematic things on his YouTube channel. And that's all it takes. That's all it takes to denounce someone. Right? Now, look, we have this saying in English, innocent until proven guilty. What about the guilty people? Onision's guilty. Don't get me wrong. He slept with the babysitter. He came out here and he promised everyone he was never going to sleep with her, and he insulted the audience and said that you people have a dirty imagination to imagine he was sleeping with this girl just because she was living with him as their live-in babysitter, and everyone was wrong and evil and bad except him. And then what do you know? She turned 18 and he slept with her. I don't think he's innocent. I think he's guilty of that exactly as described. But guess what? We all got to live in a society together, the innocent and the guilty alike. Look, it makes sense. Of course, we have stated tolerance for people who are homosexual and transsexual. So I completely dig it. Completely dig the tolerance applied across the spectrum. But yeah, then we also have a question of, how much tolerance do we have for the oldest sin on earth? Guys, if you read the Old Testament, there are cases of sleeping with and getting pregnant the slave who takes care of the children, the household servant. This goes back centuries. Because, ultimately, men aren't just immoral and selfish. They're also lazy. And the easiest woman to sleep with is the one who's already sleeping 2 rooms down the hall. So it happens, homie. It happens. And, all these people think it's self-evident that Onision doesn't have the right to earn a living as a comedian because he's slept with a babysitter. Look, he's a bad dude. There's a lot to learn from it. There's a lot for him to learn. There's a lot for us to learn. I think he's, in terms of even public relations, he's handling this completely wrong. I can disapprove as much as the rest of y'all. Okay? But, how is this going to work in a democratic society? How are we going to tolerate people as deeply flawed as Onision? So, look, it never occurred to me that Twitter would be the straw that broke the camel's back. I think everyone assumed that communications becoming more rapid and elected people in office becoming more transparent, that this would only galvanize and improve democracy as we knew it. But here we have a kind of canary in a coal mine situation where these people make a lot of money. It's a very well-paid job being a member of parliament. These people were elected and went to parliament, and they say they can't tolerate being criticized by the average man on the street, via Twitter. What does that tell you? And, Onision's had his whole saga. He's brought a lot of this on himself. but understandably he's saying, sometimes joking and sometimes he's not joking, that he can't handle, the level of scrutiny and hate mail, the nasty comments on Twitter, or on YouTube, on Facebook, or whatever media they're on. So, I know, for example, he's not joking when he complains that his wife, later his husband, is weeping. He used to say, Lainey is crying, you made her feel bad. Now he says, Kai is crying, you made him feel bad. Same person who went through gender transition. So, there's a sense in which he's not joking and looks this way. All right. Here's the fundamental tragedy, I think, is that the time is going to come when controversy becomes an end in itself. How did AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, how did she become the most important politician in America? She's one of them. She's in the top 10 now. She just did the cover. She appeared on the cover of Time magazine. She's become an enormously influential and powerful person through controversy. Right? What is controversy? Controversy is unearned attention, right? So we have people quitting the House of Parliament, giving up their role in the democratic process because of controversy, because it hurts them, right? And you have people who are accelerating their careers and becoming prominent and influential politicians through controversy. So controversy starts to become a currency to be exploited. And maybe the darkest and most miserable interpretation of what Onision has done in the latest chapter is that he did this intentionally just for the controversy. Have you considered that? He didn't need to sleep with the babysitter, but he sure did need to get tens of thousands of views. And, again, controversy is unearned attention. Think of, from his perspective, just how little effort it is now for him to get 50,000 views, 100,000 views on a video that he records spontaneously, taking off his shirt and pouring liquids over his head and this kind of nonsense. This is really low effort, drama mongering. Does anyone think it's impossible that Onision started off this process by saying, well, there's a fork in the road. If he does sleep with the babysitter, this is going to lead to controversy. This is going to lead to promotion. This is going to lead to raising his profile. This is going to lead to money in his pocket. And if he doesn't, then how's he going to get ahead? Talent, hard work, dedication. So it's scary. Yes, it's kind of paradoxical to have an elected politician who wants to avoid controversy. In the case of Heidi Allen in England, there's no way you can quit your own political party and go work for the opposite political party and it not be controversial. There's no way you can start your own political party and have it fail and then switch political parties and not be controversial. And it's fundamentally incompatible with the role of the pursuit of public interest and debating the future of a democracy to avoid controversy for the sake of your private life. You're becoming a public figure, and you're becoming a public figure on a mission, on a crusade, right? But then there's a new kind of rot that's going to set into democracy, where politicians will do whatever is most controversial, do and say whatever is most controversial to propel their own career. And, I think it's happening already to a greater extent than people realize. The right-wing politician who just got banned from Twitter in the United States, there's a right-wing conservative, because she said another politician should be hung from the neck, should be executed. You think she doesn't know what she's doing? Just like Onision. You think he wasn't intentionally going for this controversy? Who is she? She's a nobody. There are hundreds and hundreds of people elected in the state Senate and the federal Senate and so on. Doesn't it start to become a competition for who can say the most outrageous thing, much like Donald Trump himself, to get that moment of the spotlight, get that leverage, get that influence? The digitization of our social lives puts each and every one of us in a situation where the long-term consequences of the controversies we've been involved in go on forever, endlessly, permanently, and they're instantly accessible by all. In the United States of America, Anyone with a criminal record, no matter how trivial, has enormous difficulty renting an apartment. Anyone who in the past has missed payments of their rent, where there's a record of you failing to pay your rent on time, has enormous difficulty now signing up to rent a new apartment, lease a new apartment, so on and so forth. There are these kinds of consequences. And like I said about Onision is guilty. You may be guilty, but we've got to live together in a society, the guilty and the innocent alike. There was that young man covered in the press. He had made some racist comments as a joke, and it was obvious that it was a joke when he was still in high school. And then his applications for university were turned down. Not all universities, some rather than others. This wasn't politically correct enough to get a university education. Again, look, who are you educating? I mean, it's a real question. If you're a university, don't you have a mission to educate racists and rednecks? Do you only accept students who are already at a very high level of enlightenment? Well, in the United States, people go to university at 17 years old. You should be more interested in educating the ignorant and the racist. You should, whatever. I mean, get motivated. Aren't you teaching something worth learning? Do you want the rednecks to learn? And look, I mean, I'm sincere about this. I've asked people this question when there was this completely made up controversy about me. It was completely fake, made up lies about my sex life. But sometimes I said to people, look, if this were true, like, why are you doing this? Like, what's your motivation? Where's this going? Like, why don't you just talk to me? Like, if this is true, it was completely impossible. But like, if I actually flew to Scotland to have a love affair with the vegan lass, she was a popular YouTuber, and then flew back, like, kind of so what? But if I'd done this, like, all this made up crap, like, okay, so where do we go from here? I think Onision is completely guilty. But I'm still really concerned about how we have a society, including social media, including all these ridiculous, and how we have a democracy that really kind of, includes and respects, and that people like Onision can participate in. And it certainly is a bizarre contrast to look at elected members of parliament for whom it's outrageous to think that they would endure the slings and arrows of criticism when they've done something as obvious as being elected by the Conservative Party, then quitting, crossing the aisle, as we say, and joining another political party. But look, maybe we have to legislate on that too. Maybe we all have to sit down and ask, okay, what is the culture of public criticism? Most of these things are not written in any democracy. It comes up in court every so often. Lawyers lose their temper and swear in court, and then they have to face court proceedings punishing them for using curse words in court. And it's not. Well, there's some vaguely written law about not disrespecting the judge or something. Well, what does that really mean? How is that applied? Anyway. Look, all these questions were there centuries ago. I read this gruesome description of a debate about slavery in the American House of Congress that ended with one of the two members bleeding in a puddle of his own blood on the floor, beaten half to death. The pro-slavery guy beat the other guy half to death. Didn't even challenge him to a duel, just beat him right there on the on the Congress floor. You guys have been in this, but in American history, you have a couple different presidents who died in duels or killed each other in duels where, a single word of dishonor would result in men drawing pistols. But I mean, look, there's got to be justice and dignity and respect for all of us. And even a scumbag like Onision. Look, guys, human rights aren't just for people you personally like. They are, civil rights aren't just for people you sympathize with. How is Onision supposed to live? Look, as bad as his conduct has been, what he actually did, there are allegations and insults being made against that are grossly exaggerated and wildly untrue and sometimes the figment of people's imagination. What about justice and dignity and civil rights for him? So we've reached the point where it's being asked, is Twitter too mean? Is Twitter too rough and tumble for elected representatives in democracy? We've also got to ask, is Twitter too mean? Is Twitter too rough and tumble for the weakest among us, for the strongest among us, for the most notorious among us? even for Onision himself.
Dun, 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 dun.